Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right. Are you able to see the presentation here? Yes? Okay, great. All right, good evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity for us to present some information related to the Leyden Emergency Preparedness Study. As you're aware, we have come before this board previously to discuss a number of things, including the scope and an update as part of the process. And in this update, we're planning to provide some information about the study at this stage of the process, which is one of the final stages. Just to do a quick introduction, I'm John Ferruzzi. I'm the project manager, and I'm with Public Works. I have with me Nick Adams. He's with the City of Arvada as our emergency resiliency coordinator. And we have our consultant team members, Lisa Murray and Alyssa Pepper. And the four of us will be presenting information on the project. We're also accompanied by our council members and leadership team members as part of the presentation here. So with that, I'll jump into it, and let's see here. So we have about 20 slides tonight, and our agenda includes a summary of our project efforts. This includes our timeline, task deliverables, as well as information on the final phase of the study, which is related to our assessment methodology and evaluation criteria. And we're going to provide some information about the ranking process that we went through with our agency professionals, from our police department, from our fire department, from our colleagues on the technical side, and share some of the rankings related to recommendations that were provided during the initial part of the project. And then we'll be seeking feedback on the recommendations that we're planning to carry forward and discuss next steps. So just to provide a quick summary of the project efforts, we went through a process between February and March to establish the scope of work and develop a budget, and brought on Stantec consultants with us to initiate the project, establish the Speak Up webpage and public survey. And then from starting in May, we started the project and launched into the project process. In June, July, we reviewed all the public input that was provided through our outreach efforts and the efforts through Arvada Fire in their workshops. We also categorized the information for analysis and coordinated with our colleagues in the fire department related to their input. In August through November, we went through a process of developing a transportation model that would consider the trip generation levels from the neighborhoods, as well as the roadway capacity. We developed criteria related to the project analysis and coordinated with our fire department on their analysis, especially since they're working on the CWPP. The CWPP is a separate study. It's more regional in nature. Our project is more focused on the Leyden neighborhood. And at this time, what we're going to be presenting here is related to the recommendations that we've analyzed and the information that we'd like to take forward into a public meeting to be determined, but hopefully in February before we develop a final report. So with that, we're going to get into the assessment methodology and share with you some of the technical evaluation process that we went through. And I'll hand it over to my colleague, Alyssa, to provide that information.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all again. Can you go on to the next slide? Perfect. Okay, so for each of the recommendations, we needed to establish the criteria and sub-criteria that we wanted to rank them on, that they would eventually be ranked using a quantitative measure. So working with John and Nick, we established some criteria and sub-criteria from which they would be ranked upon. And I will describe each of these later on, but those three criteria that we chose were value, complexity, and resources, with those sub-criteria listed below. Next slide. So for value really answers why the recommendation should be implemented by evaluating the benefit and importance of the proposed action. So the why would be risk reduction, life and property concerns, and strengthening relationships. And again, each of these are then later given a ranked value, either from 1 to 3, 3 being high, 1 being low, and we'll define those later, what those 1 to 3 mean. Next slide. For complexity, that answers how the recommendation should be implemented by evaluating the anticipated difficulty associated with implementing the proposed action. So that could be technical difficulty, the authority by which they are able to implement that recommendation. So whether that's under like the city jurisdiction or the neighborhood, and then that political buy-in and how complicated that would be. And then the resources answers what it will take to implement the recommendation by evaluating the level of resource commitment required to implement and sustain the proposed action. So that would be the feasibility. So if it's within budget, the resource reliability, and then the resource sustainability. And then this is a lot, it's a lot of words. And so I don't expect you to read this, but I just want to show the level of detail that went into assessing the rankings for each of these sub-criteria. And so this was a lot of work with John, Nick, and the rest of the city team to establish a quantitative measure for what low, medium, high is. So John, if you want to talk a little bit about an example of how your thought process.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yes. So as part of the process, when we established the criteria and the sub-criteria, we wanted to make sure that we apply quantitative results to the qualitative type of work that we're doing. And as a result of that, the quantitative measures that we've addressed here have to do with parameters that we have around contracting or agreements or resources or operations. To give you an example, under resources, for example, here you'll see feasibility. And for feasibility, you'll notice that we have a low, medium, and high ranking depending on that type of action. And this action and the quantitative measures associated with it are based on city code on procurement requirements that we have. So, for example, if an action is cost or staff prohibitive and requires major budget or contract actions, this requires us to go through our budget process, and you're ranked low for that reason. Have to have an exhaustive process to get there as part of our overall city budget and planning and financial fiscal model. For a medium action, this would require the redistribution of internal resources, and this type of action can be authorized by the city manager and the deputy city manager. So that's listed here as a medium level range. Or an action that would cost, quite small in comparison to a bigger project, and it can be funded and staffed with existing resources. This was something that would rank high in terms of feasibility. And each one of these items in our sub-criteria have with it these types of quantitative measures to make sure that we're able to take a look at all the recommendations and evaluate them based on the criteria that is not just from the technical perspective and its operational side, but also with our city code and information on the feasibility analysis side of things. So to give you some additional information about how that worked itself out, I took a snapshot of a really large spreadsheet. I apologize, I realize it's not very clear, but on the left, you have all the recommendations that we walked away with from our previous process, discussions with the community, information that we had categorized as long-term and short-term recommendations and priorities. And the information here that you see in the orange, blue, and green, those are the criteria, and then the sub-criteria associated with those are also shown. And we basically tallied all of those up and evaluated it based upon our team members from communication and public works, the city manager's office, police department, and Arvada Fire. And as you can imagine, some of the ideas and recommendations that had been brought to us that we wanted to evaluate would rank higher with part of our agency, and then in terms of our other members, they had concerns, and this led to not just our spreadsheets and ranking the information based upon the criteria, but also meeting to discuss the information, color coding the rankings, and developing information from that is shown here on the right-hand side of the recommendations that we would then move forward into the process. And I'm going to get into these so that you can see the specifics, but I just wanted to show you the succession of how this moved from 27 recommendations from our previous stage of the study down to the recommendations that are now being shared with you as part of the process and final report. So with that, we're going to get into some of the details associated with the technical assessments, just to provide you with some additional information related to that. I should note that as part of our process, we do have categories for technical assessments here, and they're going to be related to communication, to operations, to preparedness, public awareness, and the transmission network. And what we've done is essentially we've categorized things as recommended for carrying forward and not recommended for carrying forward. The idea here is that we would want to take the best ideas that fit the capabilities on our team, as well as have the strongest effectiveness for our community. In some cases, some of the recommendations that we're not carrying forward does not mean that they're not being carried forward in general. It does mean that it might be addressed by others, or they just didn't rank as high, that there's an alternative that is better from a evacuation or fire mitigation or other perspective at the table. And we'll have the summarized list of the recommended recommendations, the top recommendations at the end of this process here. So that starts us off with recommendations related to communication. In this category, we had 3 different recommendations. The recommendation that we are carrying forward that ranked highest is invest in electronic message boards and highway advisory radios. As part of this is the information that would provide our community members and those that drive through the community with information about any kind of red flag alerts, and provide information that can be accessed on a vehicle radio station or on a message board along a roadway. It can also serve as a tool during evacuation at the time of an actual event to be able to help guide the public using the messages that would be presented and transmitted. The recommendations not carried forward were enhance the cellular network and obtain data and utilize neighborhood message boards. This is moving forward, I believe, in a separate track, and therefore the recommendation that we would want to focus in on is the message boards and the highway advisory radio. We also have a recommendation related to operations. I will pass it to Nick to provide some information related to this.
Hey, everybody. So yeah, moving to the operations realm, the recommended carry forward was update the emergency operations plan. This includes promoting the Smart 911, potentially an evacuation annex, or zonal evacuation phases that we're looking at for citywide, not just within the confines of Leyden, but we're working with Arvada Fire currently to start fielding that as a possibility. Again, these are somewhat a effort that we already do, right? We have an emergency operations plan that gets updated every year, but we can always direct that a certain way as risks change and we've identified new hazards. So that's kind of our thoughts with that. The not carried forward, we identified the create the neighborhood mitigation plan. The title to that is a little bit misleading, right? It's not that we're saying you can't create one. It's just that we're not going to create one for you. I know Candelas had created one already of their own accord, and that's definitely something we're happy to help facilitate with some of those resources that are listed down there. But that would have to be something supported and carried on by the Metro District. It's just not within our bandwidth at the city. And next slide. Cool. And then we move into preparedness. So that's also a big part of emergency management, is the preparedness aspect of it. Looking at some recommendations to support going forward, conducting an annual evacuation ready workshop. So Arvada Fire conducted 2 in June of last year, but really just doubling down on that, right? So part of their funding and operational model is based off of the where they perceive their risks. And again, we've all said wildfire is a big risk, especially in Western Nevada. So I think as a conglomerate, we're all supporting that and we're ready to put some resources towards it. We've had some of our leaders in the CERT team, which is that community emergency response team for the city. They're really interested in helping expand the grasp of Arvada Fire with these workshops and get as many of our residents engaged in it. Also, the establishing a neighborhood network. So we have a couple people up in our city manager's office that work with engaging the public. One in particular that's really, really skilled with creating that neighborhood leadership team and those block captains and all good stuff. So again, just shifting his focus from the broad into more of a target area for where's our biggest risk. Something we're not really looking at is the bi-yearly testing of the alert system. So Smart 911 or Lookout Alert is a system that not just us, but the county uses on a regular basis. I would say at least a couple times a month, an alert is getting sent out somewhere in the county. So we know the system works, and we know the cell reception is spotty in Leyden. Neither one of those variables are really going to change until a fix is put on the cell reception. So there's no point to us throwing a biannual test out there because people will get numb to those alerts, right? And then they're not going to pay attention to them when that time comes. So without anything else changing, there's really no upside on that aspect of us to testing the system since we know it works and we use it so regularly. Yeah, I think that's it for that. And then so for the public awareness, definitely something we need to throw some of our assets into. So finalizing and publishing a communication flow chart, but really what that entails is looking at our public facing website at the city level. And it's antiquated. It is not adequate right now, I feel, for not just the members of Leyden, but the entire city. And it's something since I started 6 months ago that has been an ambition of mine to get updated, but that's something we're definitely going to double down on and support updating and putting good resources, a one-stop shop for anyone that lives within Arvada to go sign up for everything they need, have all of the checklists that they could possibly need, and be able to be as prepared and safe as possible. And again, we run into the whole, everyone has a website, everyone has a link to go do all this stuff. So if we can compile all of that for what does a citizen of Arvada need into one place, that's only going to help everyone out. Going into things not carried forward, conducting an annual evacuation tabletop exercise. Again, a somewhat misleading title because annually we will continue conduct tabletops, and they will most likely often involve an evacuation in some scale, but we can't have it just a annual one for the confines of Leyden every year. That's just not going to help us improve any of our efficiency or our response capability. So definitely wildfire is one of our top 3 right now for our risks. So that's going to be in there. And anytime you deal with a wildfire, you deal with the evacuation. It may just not always be confined to the Leyden and Candelas area. It may be further south, still within the city. So again, just more of a finite limitation of that. But yeah, I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so the recommendation related to transmission network is something that we were also working on as part of the project to evaluate carefully. There were a number of both short-term and long-term recommendations in this particular category. And I want to point to 2 cross-sections that we have here on this particular graphic. We had presented the one cross-section at the last open house and discussed ways to enhance the shoulders and provide for a 3-lane operation in case of an emergency, and the capacity analysis of the road for both the 2-lane and the 3-lane as part of our overall 20-minute, 40-minute, and 60-minute evacuation process. In addition to that, Arvada Fire also conducted their analysis around the CWPP and the threats in the area related to fuel loads, and with updated maps and information, what that would look like for our roadway corridors. And we looked at both of these elements together, and the recommendations that came together that were part of the carried forward were overlapping between the two studies. Enhancing West 82nd Avenue roadside corridor was one of the recommendations from Arvada Fire that we had also identified as part of our analysis, as well as State Highway 72 Indiana Street widening. And the recommendations that we're not carrying forward relate to ongoing projects and efforts and information that is happening, whether it's the expansion of trails and sidewalks, developing the Jefferson Parkway, reviewing a railroad crossing, enforcing on-street parking, adding access roads, and zonal evacuation information. These efforts in general, while they were evaluated as part of our transportation analysis, they did not show the added benefit in relationship to complexity that they present compared to the West 82nd Avenue roadside corridor recommendation and the State Highway 72 Indiana Street widening recommendation. We also documented the regulatory context related to working around the railroad right-of-way and its requirements, as well as an open space reverter on the south side of West 82nd Avenue. We evaluated a number of issues that were on the CWPP side related to creating an operational environment for our firefighters that were also studied in conjunction with this, and a 73-foot buffer area on both sides of West 82nd Avenue would provide a mitigation area to protect the users of the roadway, but also to protect our firefighters and emergency responders when defending the corridor. And as part of the process, we did have discussion around these recommendations. And just to kind of give you an example, with the trails and sidewalks, we looked at the recommendation to add a trail parallel to the tracks and use it during an emergency evacuation. And in this particular case, part of the discussion between our police department and our colleagues in Arvada Fire were around, if you're evacuating folks through an area that has grasses that present high risk and may essentially trap individuals, that it may present life safety concerns. And the kind of considerations from all sides related to communication, where do we want to concentrate that? How do we want to staff? How do we want to operate? How do we want to protect individuals? Landed us with the recommendations that you're seeing here related to West 82nd Avenue and State Highway 72. So to summarize, we have these 8 summary recommendations from all of the recommendations that we have grouped up to this point, both short-term and long-term, and analyzed through our technical analysis process. This includes operational information such as the neighborhood network or an emergency operations plan, but also it includes infrastructure-related items such as adding West 82nd Avenue roadside reflectors and enhancing West 82nd Avenue corridor as a risk reduction zone, and State Highway 72 Indiana widening. So having this information and bringing it together for the studies has been effective in terms of identifying from the different emergency responders and from the agency side, the technical information, which recommendations make the most sense for effectiveness from our team. And this is the information that we are interested in moving forward into the final report and wanted to share with you this evening. With that, we were going to propose a couple of next steps here as well, before we open it up to discussion. From a internal perspective, we, as a next step, plan to use the study as a model for regional coordination. As part of the project, we talked about the CWPP and how we would take this information and apply it to other neighborhoods and in the more regional sense for our related to CWPP study and the work that our colleagues are doing. Additionally, we wanted to discuss the city and metro district developing a framework on the infrastructure needs. And in preparation for February, which would be our public meeting number 3, we'd want to share this information for your feedback and get your input on how this may support or generate questions related to the final report before we develop a final report. And the last item here is formalizing a partnership to initiate any kind of engineering need on the recommendations that are infrastructure related. So with that, I'll pause and open it up to any kind of questions and input at this time.
John, thank you very much for your and your team's work on all of this. I can't tell you how much we appreciate the time and the effort that you and all the city employees involved in this and the Stantec team have put in. For board member questions, I do want to propose that we just do a round robin. Each board member has up to 5 minutes to ask questions and about the study, and then we, after 5 minutes, we'll yield to the next board member and we'll just kind of go around in a circle until everybody's got all their questions in, but everyone's had a chance to speak. Does that sound fair enough to everyone? I have just a couple of questions. I'm going to defer towards the last. Who'd like to go?
I'll go. No, I'll go. Go ahead.
I'll go. So the 82nd project, all the pictures have demonstrated eastbound. Does that include westbound from Culebra to Indiana? And what about the medians, which will not allow a third lane to go through? So how would the third lane allow fire trucks to get to Culebra when there's medians? And does Arvada have experience in emergency preparedness, changing a lane that's probably going to be packed at 2 lanes and somehow making it into 3 lanes? Do they have experience with that traffic? And how exactly would that look? That there's a fire, there's an evacuation order, 82nd is full, most likely it's full. How does the fire department or the police or law enforcement, whomever, how do they make a packed 2-lane road settling into 3 lanes?
I appreciate the question, and I can help provide some information related to our analysis. So you had asked about the medians and some of the sections that are a little wider versus those that are a little narrower. And as part of our analysis, what we had looked at were those particular sections having bike lanes and providing additional width that could be used for establishing the width that we need to operate multiple lanes in the area. So intersections have turn lanes, and then when you add the bike lanes on the approach to the intersections, there are a bit of areas with width that wouldn't then require us to remove the medians and allow us to operate the 2 lanes eastbound and 1 lane westbound. In terms of the areas that are narrower, we are proposing to enhance the shoulders. Now, looking at the actual width of the road, the edge of gravel to edge of gravel, we do have a 30-foot wide roadway corridor in the area. And the roadway itself currently operates with wider travel lanes that are one in each direction, which is pretty normal for a travel lane, 12 to 15 feet. However, we wouldn't need two 15-foot lanes for an emergency situation. We could divide that into three 10-foot lanes, operate two in the eastbound direction and one in the westbound. But we are recommending some enhancements to those shoulders to be able to do that. So what that would look like or feel like is similar to what you might experience through a construction zone when you have channelization in an existing roadway, but with narrower lanes, and given the speeds that we're talking about and the support of our team members on the ground, that is something that was discussed and could be supported.
You didn't quite answer two of my questions, though. Is the quote unquote third lane gonna go from Calabria to Indiana? And has Arvada or Arvada law enforcement or fire protection had experience with a lane that's already full of cars, making that lane into adding a third lane somehow on diverting traffic? Has any agency in Arvada had any experience moving cars to allow for a third lane? And how would that look?
Yeah, apologies. In terms of the area that we're looking at we're evaluating the project for the entire segment of West 82nd Avenue.
Right.
But from Calabria to Indiana, which is the areas that have the intersections with the widening that we're talking about, those medians and turn lanes, bike lanes, those areas actually have the ability to accommodate multiple lanes with the infrastructure the way it's designed, but would be operated a little bit differently than the way it's currently striped. Now, as we get to narrower sections of the roadway, your question about do we have experience operating traffic in multiple lanes that differ from the way things are set,
No, that wasn't my question.
we do have that one.
In a lane that is in a road that is already packed with cars, because if there's I'm sure the authorities are not going to be able to get to it preemptively, because they're going to do other things. What does the process look like when a lane is full of cars, some going in either direction? How does a street that's already full of cars somehow diverted to add a third lane? This would be not before, not conceptually. I just want to know how it would look that a lane's full of cars would somehow you'd be squeezing in a third lane, and how would that look? Since the police and fire department probably cannot get to the intersections to start the process. So that's my main concern. And to talk about the other direction, there's sections where there's a side rail and an oak tree on eastbound 82nd after Calabria that cannot support a third lane. I drive it every single day, and it is impossible. There's a hill there, there's a side rail. There's no way in heck you're going to fit a third lane there.
Yeah,
Hey, Scott, I can speak to some of the PD and those aspects of it, right? So first off, with the whole plan for this road, all we've said at this point is that it's something that we want to look into. We haven't drafted any plans. We haven't gone out there and surveyed anything. And obviously some of the areas that you've identified like that are going to be the same things that we identify as we go through this process. This is really just a feasibility study to see if we're even going to throw resources at it. Secondly, with the experience of this exact scenario, every scenario is different. So can I say that they've run this exact play like an NFL play 100 times? Absolutely not. But all of those PD officers have the same traffic management experience that you do across any part of the Colorado, right? They're all certified. They all go through, hey, this is an emergency. I need to shut this lane down. I'm out here with a flare and a flashlight and myself, and I'm directing traffic, right? So yes, they may not be out there the second that evacuation order starts, but with our Delta sector department out there, they're able to get resources on hand pretty quickly. And as soon as they identify through their leadership that they're going to start doing that lane shift, then they're out there, with walking via hand and directing traffic into those lanes as needed. So definitely a case by case, because not all of them are going to need this, right? If it's a pre-evac and half the neighborhood's already out, then this may not even be an issue. But again, once we get to that point of widening this whole section, then that's where we go back to that tabletop option of, hey, now we've got this new thing. This would be a good time for us to run through a drill, kind of see what the left and right parameters are. Is this, really going to work well? What do we need to train on for our guys? So it's not all at once, but it will escalate and get to that point where they're ready to rock by the time we get with us.
Taking enough time, so I'll defer to another board member. Thank you both for your answers.
Hi, thanks you guys for being here tonight and doing this. This is great. My questions are, so we're widening Indiana, and you said the risk reduction zones, you're gonna widen on 82nd. Is that what I'm hearing? Like taking down the dead trees that are kind of going over the road and widening it out a bit. Is that on 82nd? Is that correct?
Yes, so the two recommendations that are most effective for the analysis that we did is widening State Highway 72 Indiana, so that north-south corridor, especially as there are bottlenecks in certain parts of that corridor that prevent our emergency responders from stations and different areas from getting to West 82nd Avenue. And then West 82nd Avenue itself has narrow sections that are gravel shoulders. And yes, we are looking at that to be able to then accommodate a 30-foot wide asphalt area divided into three 10-foot lanes. And in terms of vegetation management, that would go beyond that asphalt into the areas outside of the roadway, but would support essentially a safe passage zone. That's where our colleagues from the fire department have been helping us review the vegetation and types of fuel loads along the roadway to be able to help support the project. So they also recommended West 82nd Avenue for some improvements.
Okay, were you thinking about doing a bike lane? Is that what you were saying, along the side of the road, or are you trying to put it on the road?
So we haven't identified a bike lane or sidewalk or any kind of definition around what that shoulder looks like, except for developing a shoulder that is useful for an emergency purpose. Once we get into the engineering of that, we could begin to look at that to see how it could be marked or signed, and what purpose it could serve in the interim.
Okay, and then the access road going up into Leyden Ranch, I know that's for emergency vehicles, but it has like 2 to 3 inch trees coming up through the asphalt now. And I'm wondering, is this part of your plan, cutting that all out and maintaining that road, or is that Leyden Ranch's problem?
Well, we have, as part of the questions that were brought up in the previous public open house, gone through and reviewed both right-of-way ownership as well as easements that are out there related to that particular access point, and shared information with a representative of Leyden Ranch to discuss some of those needs. Our colleagues also from our parks department have helped identify the type of vegetation that's growing and solutions to help with that. So we'll do what we can to help support the process to make sure that access serves the easement, the emergency access easement that it's supposed to. But at the end of the day, when it comes to right of way and the amount of control that we have, if it's outside of the city, then we have to work through our partners to be able to get that taken care of.
Okay, and then one more question. Where would the radio signs be? Would it be on 82nd, or like where on 82nd or on Indiana? Where would these radio signs be?
Typically, there are multiple strategic locations that are considered as part of the design process to identify where to place them. Usually decision points are where this information is positioned. So for example, if you have at an approach to Indiana and 82nd Avenue, a location where people can turn off because the roadway is closed, you'd want to give that information beforehand, before they get to West 82nd Avenue. That's not to say that West 82nd Avenue itself wouldn't provide that opportunity. There's Quaker and other kinds of decision points also within the corridor, but we haven't identified the exact locations because once we do get into design, we're going to look at a number of factors, including how does that decision point factor into fiber and connectivity and other things that we would need to be able to access that kind of information, turn it on and off, and that kind of thing. So we don't have exact locations yet, but we have general ideas of how that could work.
Okay, should we have something in our community for like, this is the radio channel that you should tune into if anything happens? Should we
Yeah.
have those signs?
So the boards will have basically beacons that would go off and say, tune into FM whatever or AM whatever when flashing. So the whole idea of placing this on the major roadway that feeds into the streets into a neighborhood is that it would catch the majority of traffic, both pass by and the neighborhood traffic in the area. And so I do think that that's going to be the best way to be able to signal to the majority of folks what's happening, because especially if something is about to happen, we can provide messages beforehand about an emergency and then let people tune into that emergency at the time of an evacuation and such. So probably not in the neighborhood itself, like on local streets, but on the arterial, yes. We're planning to have that information about tuning into a certain station.
Great, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Candace or Jeff?
I've got just one question remaining from what I've heard so far. When you talk about a 73-foot buffer zone on either side of the road and you encounter private property, does this mean you'll be telling homeowners what kind of plantings they're allowed to have? How are you going to handle that?
So part of this has to do with the fire department's assessment of the type of vegetation that they've worked with Jefferson County and a CSU extension program that looks at the type of vegetation. To be honest, I don't know exactly how the buffer zones will be handled when the property owners are varying throughout the corridor along that particular corridor. But I do believe that for those that live and play and work in the area, that this would be important enough that our colleagues in the fire department and their recommendations would be seriously considered. So we need to work through that a little bit further. We just know that the assessment shows that we could create a safe passage zone if we do manage the vegetation well and provide that buffer.
So you've still got a ways to go on that. Okay. Thanks,
Yes.
John.
Yes, correct. Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Again, John, thank you for putting this all together and your work on this. I just have a few questions. It's been a very detailed report. I'm sure you'll understand that we'll need some time to review this. I hope you share the deck with us.
Yes.
Where we can go through it and then come back possibly with some more detailed questions. To make sure I'm understanding clearly, you are proposing some improvements to Indiana to widen the shoulders to ensure that there is 30 feet of travelable area along the entire corridor. Is that correct? Is that what I'm understanding?
Brett, do you mean West 82nd or do you mean Indiana?
I'm sorry, West 82nd. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, correct. So we are looking at West 82nd Avenue, having some improvements, both from barrier reflectors to identify the edges of the roadway, and then the shoulder areas also being improved where they're gravel. So essentially, there are a number of things that are, I'll say, transportation or infrastructure related on our end, but also Arvada Fire is proposing some improvements related to the vegetation adjacent to the roadway.
So those shoulders would remain gravel, they just might be widened in areas that's needed, is that correct?
No, I'm sorry, we're proposing to harden them. And so asphalt would be, I think, the preferred way, but we don't have a design yet to say exactly what that would look like. But we do want to harden them into something that would probably be like asphalt at that point.
Okay, so 30-foot wide hardened roadway.
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
understand that a lot better. That was my main question. I do have significant concerns that were raised during the evacuation study from the second presentation. Namely the capacity of the roadway to be able to handle a fire coming from the west, coming from the 82nd Avenue near the foothill, near the foothills landfill. If the fire were coming that way and evacuation to the west were no longer available, would the roadway have capacity? I also had similar concerns to Scott's about the ability to be able to bifurcate the road into 3 lanes in an emergency situation, and especially in a rapidly moving fire. I have other concerns along those lines, but I think that's plenty for now. Thank you very much. How soon are you looking for feedback from the board on this?
Thank you. Yes. So we are I plan to share the presentation with the board, and we would appreciate feedback within a couple of weeks so that we can schedule out our third public meeting and share some of the information with the public as well. So is that something that is that will work for the board in terms of a timeline?
That'll be difficult for us since we only have meetings every 2 weeks, and our next meeting wouldn't be again for another 2 weeks. So, and that agenda is already filling up. We will do our very best, and we'll work with you to try and get you the information that you need so that you can schedule a community meeting. Fair enough?
I would appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. Bob, I think you have a question here.
Well, if the board would, with the board chair allow me to give some comments at the end when you're done, I'd love to do that.
Love to hear what you have to say.
Are you done, John?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I asked to be on here, and I appreciate the board allowing myself and Council Member Frey to join tonight. She and I, and actually most of the council is interested in this topic. Obviously, West Arvada has a risk. It's very important to all of us. All I can say is this is a multifaceted issue. In fact, I'm doing a truck pool with the new Fire Station 9 with their Type 3 truck that they just got a brand new one, which is, I think it's a brush fire truck. But I guess we're going to all pull it out of the firehouse on the 3rd if you all like to join. But they're reinforcing their assets to address it. So when you look at multifaceted, it takes a lot of agencies and a lot of different groups to start making incremental improvements to move forward. And I think what John has shared tonight are some of those incremental improvements that are low-hanging and, in my opinion, attainable actions. We can't sit here and say, I'd love to say, let's get that road over the railroad and do everything else. But we also know it's a $40 million now project just to widen Indiana's railroad bridge over to widen that. So, yeah, we'd love to go after the expensive, big infrastructure projects. We just don't have the money or the capabilities or the timing. So at the end of the day, I appreciate the incremental improvements to address it. I think what will happen over time, and you'll probably see this, and sometimes we don't see, it's taken me 12 plus years to learn some of this stuff being on council, but you have to take those incrementals. And I don't think the city ever stops taking the incrementals, especially in an area that still has growth and change. we will continue to see different things happening on the western part of Arvada, unlike the eastern part of Arvada that's been more established and has been there for 60, 70 years. So, as you walk through this journey, I'm here to support you as the board and obviously all the constituents of the community. You all know I live in Candelas, so I'm just across the railroad tracks. I saw the Marshall Fire from my house, and that's how close it was to us. So trust me, I get the concern, but I appreciate the fact that there is so many people involved and engaged from the fire district. Justin's been involved from trails, and you guys are looking at trails that has a buffer play to it. The fire department's buying new assets. The city's trying to look at the infrastructure. That's why I think that multifaceted really needs to be thought of when we go through this. What I ask of the board is to continue to be engaged, continue to be involved. And when the technical details come out from the city and John's team, those technical details are what you'll learn from the future meetings. And those are other points to adjust and understand. Are we removing the tree or getting rid of the guardrail? That's what it's called there, Jeff. It's a guardrail. Sorry, I'm the DOT guy. But those type of infrastructures do change. And the city will go over those details once they feel that the trajectory of their proposals are accepted. And so I don't expect the team to have all the answers. That it might be more technical tonight. So I appreciate at least we're going the right direction. So I just want to thank everyone's time tonight. I want to thank everyone being interested in this topic, and I want to thank the city team for getting on here and supporting our communities and trying to get to an attainable solution that we can see incremental improvements. So again, thank you to the city team. Thank you for the board for giving me an opportunity to chat and letting us come and present tonight.
Thank you, Bob. Any other board members have any questions or comments on this topic? Well, to everyone on the city team, thank you very much for all your hard work again. And we look forward to further discussions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Take care.
Time to stop recording.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you all.